Hey Know Why listeners, in a few days, it's gonna be May. If you didn't get the Justin Timberlake reference, then that's okay. But May is also Mental Health Awareness Month. A survey recently came out in preparation for Mental Health Awareness Month that I want to talk about quickly in this week's episode. So here's what the survey found. Nearly 4 in 10 Americans, 38% to be precise, went no contact with a friend or family member in the last year. And among millennials and Gen Z, that number is way higher. 60% of Gen Z and 50% of millennials have cut someone off in the past year. Among Gen X, just 38% have done so, and only 20% of baby boomers have done so. Why is this happening, and how does it impact one's mental health when they are cutting people out of their lives? Does it improve it if they're cutting out people who are toxic and annoying, or does it make it worse? That's what I want to break down in this week's episode. So let's dive in. First off, the article asks, and I'm going to link the article, by the way, of course, so that you can read it for yourself. What does no contact actually look like? Well, here's an example. More than a third of Americans, 36%, blocked a friend or family member on social media last year, and 30% booted a loved one from a group chat. So these are kind of, in today's day and age, the main places where a lot of people are communicating. So if you block someone on social media, or you block their phone number, or you don't allow them to contact you via text or calling or things like that, that's pretty much as final as it can get in the way that we typically communicate today. Short of actually just like showing up at somebody's house, then you're not going to contact that person anymore. Why is this happening? Well, first of all, I just want to acknowledge that you might know someone who's done this. Maybe you have actually had this done to you. It's becoming a lot more of a thing. And so I'm really glad that this article addressed it, even though this article, I'll just say, it's from Vice. So I don't necessarily agree with the article that doesn't critically and analyze this data. It just kind of presents it as an understandable trend, and I want to go a little bit deeper, but the data is helpful. So here are the top reasons cited by respondents in this survey of why they decided to cut somebody off. Number 1, 36% said that the person was not respectful to me. 29% said that the relationship negatively impacted my mental health. 27% said that the person they cut off was too negative in general. 24% said that their values differed too much from my values. 19% simply said I outgrew the relationship. And 19% also said we disagreed about politics or social issues. So what we are seeing is really a lot of disagreement. Of course, we have some things specifically like disrespect, but then negativity, and then really a lot of differences. And so the big picture here, and this is again just from the experts that they cited who had done this survey, is that avoidance is becoming the default. Get this, 73% of respondents said they felt inclined to distance themselves from a friend or loved one during difficult moments, rather than communicate openly to solve the problem. Next, it quotes Dr. Nicole Benders-Haidt, who's the chief medical officer at Talkspace, which is the organization that did this survey. And she said, avoiding relationship challenges is becoming more common, but that approach can come with its own risks, making it harder to sustain meaningful connections over time and leading to more loneliness. She is so right. And this is really what I want to emphasize, because as millennials and Gen Z are rapidly cutting off more and more people in their lives, are they having improved mental health? No, you are seeing mental health problems continue to be at high levels among the younger generations. And I think one of the reasons for that is that we really have not been taught or not had to practice conflict resolution or problem-solving skills. Those are basic relationship skills. And so if you avoid somebody or you cut them off anytime there is a difference of opinion or a conflict or discomfort in the relationship, your circle is going to get very small very fast. And that is exactly what is happening. Here's more research. 47% of respondents said they experience loneliness on a typical day. Not surprising. 34% feel less socially connected now than they did 5 years ago. Also not surprising. You're cutting off all of your social connections. Another thing is people are intentionally avoiding people. Now, I am kind of having to talk to myself here a little bit because I am naturally an introvert. And so I've definitely done most of these things myself, minus the chatbot use. But 64% of people use self-checkout kiosks instead of actually going where there's a cashier when they're at the store. 68% order online. 42% use chatbots. And this is specifically to avoid human interaction, not just like, well, they happened to do that or the line was too long, so I'm going to go do the self-checkout. But they're specifically doing these because they want to avoid interaction with people. 40% of people said they would cross the street to avoid interacting with someone they know that might result in like a 5-minute conversation. So they'll avoid somebody. Have you ever avoided someone in the store? Maybe you've been in Walmart or you've been walking around and you like try to hide or turn the other way because you just don't want to have a conversation right now. I think we can all relate to that, but it is a problem if that is becoming the norm and the trend, not just like, oh my gosh, I've had a long day. There's somebody that I haven't seen in forever and I don't want to have a catch-up conversation right now. And maybe that in itself is problematic and we should be more open to spontaneity and connection like that. But we're talking about trends that are the majority of young adults are participating in, where they are intentionally avoiding human interaction and they are cutting off contact with people who cause them discomfort or friction. Okay, here's another thing. 68% of respondents said they struggle to build in-person community. Gee, I wonder why. But before I get too critical, it might not be their fault or our fault. I'm a millennial, okay? I have to help own this. 31% of respondents said they want to get more involved locally, and they do want to build those connections, but as the article states, people just want to do it on their own extremely specific terms. So again, there are parts of this that I get and understand as an introvert, and we definitely have seen a rise in our generations in mental health awareness and intentionality. And I don't think all of that is bad, though you can definitely criticize large portions of therapy culture, and there are important books that have done that and are a lot better at doing it than I am. But what I really want to talk about is the fact that this kind of expectation that we are seeing by millennials and Gen Z to not have discomfort or challenge or conflict in a relationship, that's just not reality. We have moved as a society from rightly calling out abusive behaviors and people who are truly toxic to an unrealistic expectation that no person worth spending time with or no relationship worth maintaining will ever make us feel uncomfortable, will never hurt our feelings, or will never be a little ignorant about something that really matters to us, that will never disagree with us, and that will never have a conflict or argument with. Those are just not realistic things. And if you have a relationship like that where you've literally never had a difference of opinion or conflict or awkward moment, or like you've gotten a little bit mad at somebody, then I think maybe you've just been friends with a robot, because that is what happens when you have relationship with other unique human beings. So it is a fantasy for us to think that we can just eliminate friction. But here's the problem. For a long time in society, that's exactly what we have done. Jonathan Haidt is a sociologist that I am quoting more and more because he keeps putting out research that is so important. But one of the books that he wrote several years ago, or I think he co-authored it, was The Coddling of the American Mind. And one of the things that he and his co-author document is how millennials and Gen Z really, the way they were raised, it eliminated a lot of friction. And people like joke about participation trophies becoming a thing and all of that. But that's just one tiny example of a culture from that to kind of helicopter parenting, more parental involvement, to like safe spaces and things like that, trigger warnings, all of these where maybe there's use for them in certain scenarios for like people who truly have been through traumatic events or things like that. But it has gone to an extreme, or it got to an extreme, so that you had adults who were moving out into the world who really had never experienced friction. They were raised with kind of this false, unrealistic expectation that they shouldn't have to experience friction in life. And another thing I think that contributes to this is social media. Now, Gen Z in general is very aware of the negative effects of social media, of the digital devices that we have, like smartphones. In fact, just earlier today, I was talking about an article from Axios where Gen Z is leading the trends of digital detox. They are actually going more analog. They are the ones that are intentionally reducing their screen times because they see the negative effect. So what I would challenge anyone listening to think about is that one of the negative effects of being raised on social media, where you are connecting online more than you are connecting in real life, is that by its very nature just eliminates a lot of friction. When you are outside and you're playing, or your socialization is happening in person in real life, you're naturally going to have more opportunities for there to be conflict and for you to have to resolve that. And we know as kids from, memories on the playground that if you literally can't exist in any sort of group with other children or in a classroom or any sort of environment without coming up against conflict of some sort. Somebody says something rude, somebody does something that hurts your feelings, you get in an argument over a toy, things like that. Those things naturally happen, but those are good things because they teach kids from a young age those conflict resolution skills. Now, obviously, I think you need to be a little more intentional about teaching conflict resolution than just, what naturally happens on the playground. But when you take that element out, you don't have any of that natural teaching. And think about this. If you go to any sort of relationship counseling or premarital counseling, which is especially if you are religious, then you likely are going to have to do that before you get married in your church. One of the biggest topics is conflict resolution. There is never an expectation in any sort of profession that deals with relationships and teaching people how to have good relationships that there should not be conflict. And if you're going to a therapist that is telling you that you should expect not to have conflict in a relationship, then I'm sorry, but they're wrong, because that's just human beings. That's life. Okay, so just to kind of tie it all together, Jonathan Haidt, who I referenced a minute ago, has said and pointed to data that children who were raised in religious communities have far better mental health than children who were not, especially after 2012, which is when you really saw the spike in youth mental health. That was when smartphones became ubiquitous. This has been, tracked and discussed by research and data and sociologists over and over and over again. So we know that 2012 is kind of when that spike in poor mental health among youth and adolescents happened. And it wasn't that religious children weren't affected by it, but those who were raised in religious communities were not affected by it nearly as much. And one of the reasons that he says is because they are raised within a structure. They have those built-in roots and communities that people really need in order to thrive and flourish. Again, research shows this. So he's an atheist, by the way, and he was saying that if you're not religious, you have to be extra intentional about building those kinds of roots and communities for your children, because if they're not getting that naturally because you're a part of a church community or something like that, then they're going to really miss it. Now, of course, I believe that there are more reasons to go to church, and particularly to go to church as a Christian believer, than just for the social benefits, because I believe it's ultimately about truth and salvation in Jesus Christ. But the research does show that when you're rooted in that kind of community, you tend to have better mental health outcomes. And one of the reasons why I think that is, and want to connect it to the cutting people off topic, is because that gives you that natural practice of interacting with other people. Unless you think that people in a religious community are always like-minded and always get along, let me assure you, as somebody who's raised in church my entire life, that is not the case. But in these communities, especially ones who are based in God's word, okay, they value community, because as a Bible-believing Christian, you have to believe that humans were made in God's image, were created for relationship. We are taught in scriptures not to neglect the gathering together with other believers. So there is an inherent valuing of community, despite the fact that there will be friction or conflict or disagreement. Okay, now I want to just state a caveat. Obviously, this isn't always absolutely true, because if you've been raised in church like me, you've also seen where conflict was not handled well. If you've experienced church hurt or gone through the drama of a church split, then you know that Christians, just like anyone else, can fail at relationships and conflict. But overall, those who are walking biblically, they are specifically taught conflict resolution, because the Bible gives a very specific plan of how to deal with people that you disagree with, or how to deal with problems in communities and relationships. It's not a bunch of kumbaya. A lot of the letters in the New Testament are actually the Apostle Paul calling people out for doing wrong things and then saying, here's how you need to fix it. Here's how you need to address that person. Here's how you do this. Okay, so there's all kinds of examples of conflict resolution in the Bible. They're never told, though, just don't get together because of conflict. You try to resolve it. The Bible also teaches about grace for others and forgiveness. You're taught to value, like I said, family and community, to love in a sacrificial way that puts others' needs and interests before your own. And while this can seem upside down to what the culture currently values, which is I'm protecting my peace, I am doing what's right for me, I'm living my truth, when you are in a position to actually love somebody else sacrificially, that actually gives you more purpose and fulfillment in life. So we're taught to love our enemies. That doesn't mean, and I know that churches have abused this, there are examples of this, okay? The Bible does not teach that you have to allow yourself to be abused or anything like that. But because we are taught about grace and forgiveness and love and loving our enemies, that naturally gives somebody who is walking in a biblical worldview, I think, a resistance to cut people off right away simply because there is disagreement. So it's no surprise, I think, that kids who are raised in that kind of community tend to have better mental health outcomes for all kinds of reasons, not the least of which is the fact that they have learned how to deal with conflict resolution, and they have been taught that relationships and community is worth it. So our culture has been lying to youth. Millennials and Gen Z, many have been coddled out of any friction in life. They've been told to protect their peace at all costs, when what that actually means is refusing to tolerate any discomfort or disagreement or conflict. They've been given devices that actively prevent them from participating in real life community where that kind of conflict resolution naturally occurs. And so I don't think we can be surprised that many young adults today are lonely. So my challenge is, for anyone listening who maybe has struggled with this, is to not let that friction, even disagreement about core things that you care about a lot, resist the urge to cut someone off. And even if you're not the kind of person that's like, I'm just going to cut contact with, so-and-so, but maybe you just start to avoid, actively resist that. I would say go into those relationships and continue to have conversations, continue to dig in, even talk about what you disagree about. What's more authentic than being able to share? But if we have to value other people, we have to value them as individuals, as human beings. And so if we want to be treated with that kind of respect, and that was one of the reasons that people said that, they cut people off, they didn't feel respected, we have to be willing to extend that respect as well. And it has to start somewhere. I just think it's really sad that people are getting lonelier and lonelier, and they're not forming the connections that they need to flourish, and they're sacrificing important relationships because they disagree about certain things and they haven't been taught to deal with friction. And guess what? There are a lot of big things in the culture and in politics and in the world that matter a lot. I would be willing to guarantee that almost all of the time, a political difference, even a really deep one, is not worth losing a friendship over. You can maintain a relationship and find something much deeper and more important to connect with somebody over. And you should still value them as a human being anyway, especially if there's somebody that is related to you or in your church community. Don't give up that kind of community that you need to flourish in life just over disagreements or even hurt. That's my challenge today. I'm going to list the article that I've been referencing as well as a few other resources in the comments, and I'm going to leave it here nice and short, at least a little shorter than the last few episodes have been. And well, let me know what you think. If you've experienced this in your life, or maybe you have some different opinions about why this is happening, feel free to leave a comment. And don't forget to subscribe anywhere you listen and tell somebody about the Know Why podcast. I'll see you next week.